We're live. Thank you, Wes. That was awesome. All right. Good morning, everybody. It's Sunday, November 29th, almost the end. We hope you enjoyed the week if you had time off. If not, if you enjoyed the weather, we hope everything is well with you and your family. So welcome to Triumph Life Center's spiritual gathering. We are here on Zoom and we're also live on Facebook. A quote to start us off. If we are to preserve culture, we must continue to create it. And we've been kind of going on this theme of how we are co-creators of culture, how we as a community can reimagine community and make it better for everyone, for ourselves and for the people around us. Today we'll be discussing housing insecurity and some topics related to tenants' rights. With a guest that we have from Housing Rights Initiative. His name is Aaron Carr. I see you just joined the call. What's up?
Hi, how are you?
We're awesome. Thank you. Good morning.
Morning.
So we'll go through our opening and then we will have Aaron come through and share some information with us. As usual, we have our meditation, we have our opening prayers and sacred readings, and we will continue on from there. Thank you. So let's start with this reading. It's from the New Bible for our time. You know that all my life was one great drama, a pattern for humanity. I live to show the possibilities for the humanity. I am the norm, not the exception. What I have done and what I was able to become, all humanity can do, and even more so. You can exceed what I was able to do because of my example. Be the Christ the earth seeks today. Jesus of Nazareth. Thank you. So before we begin, let's relax ourselves a little bit. Let's ground ourselves, take some breaths together, and set the intentions for this virtual space. I'm going to use my singing bowl as usual. So I will strike it 3 times as I begin, and I invite you to just take some nice breaths. You're welcome to close your eyes if that's comfortable for you. I invite you to relax your body. Notice how those first few breaths might have changed any tension, how the energy might have moved itself around. I invite you to do a quick body scan. You can start from the top of your head, your crown. Move down your face. Notice if your jaw is clenched, you can let it go. Your neck, your shoulders, your chest if there's any tightness. As you breathe in and breathe out, just let that tightness, that tension, let it go. And as you move down your waist, move down your spine to your bottom, wherever you're sitting. Feel your weight being held up by what you're sitting on. And you can move down your thighs, your knees, your calves, and your ankles, your feet, your toes, and you can imagine going down even further. The energy from your body is like little root tendrils that begin to dig deep into the soil, past all the rocks, all the layers of soil, all the little worms and bugs, the bones of creatures that are no longer, And you make your way down, down, down the earth towards the core, where you imagine a warm, glowing, an energy-filled light. We are connected to Mother Earth always, and we can always connect through these roots that we can visualize. And you can just take a deep breath and breathe in that energy from Mother Earth. She's always there with you. And as you've taken that energy, give back gratitude. As you take in and soak up that energy, give back love. Give back understanding and patience and open-mindedness. And you can start to pull back those little tendrils. Let them start to zoom back towards you. Pull them up past the dirt, past the soil, all the layers of rock, and right back to your feet. And all of that warmth is in your body. And let's just take 3 more deep breaths and we'll close. You could sigh if that feels good, shake anything out. And one more. Thank you. Together we've strengthened ourselves in an expression of unity, love, and purpose to better relate to ourselves, to others, and the environment. Our Mother Earth, our home. Thank you, Ashe. So again, I feel nice. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to our virtual gathering. My name is Brenda. I'm one of the staff members at TLC. Online with us, I see Wesley, our musician who started us off. Thank you so much, Wes. I see Travis is here. Hi, Trav. Professor Sandra Addison Brito is here. Nadia, another staff member, welcome. And of course, again, our guest, Aaron Carr, welcome. We hope you had some time to breathe. Again, we hope everyone enjoyed their time last week, however you chose to celebrate or to not celebrate. And as usual, we're centering our conversations on the theme of reimagining community. So today in particular, we're talking about housing insecurity and security with the founder of Housing Rights Initiative. And we're always going back to these questions: what kind of world do you want to live in? And what would it take to create that world? So enjoy yourself, relax. You're welcome to share this stream on your page. If you have any comments or questions, you could put them in the chat box or as a comment online. We will address it. As always, the Christ in me celebrates the Christ in you, and together we'll make our world brand new. Thank you.
So good morning, all, and welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
Are you going to read or shall I?
Yeah, I think I can read.
Okay.
Welcome everyone to our gathering this morning. So Triumph's 7 life-affirming principles, basis of community. We affirm that life is in the breath and breath is life. Therefore, we join together to promote our shared humanity and inseparable breath. We affirm that we are born whole, complete, as perfect manifestations of the universal mind, Christ. We affirm our physical bodies differ, and as such may present different challenges, limitations, or privileges that everyone may not share in. Therefore, we join together to share our strengths and support one another where there may be weaknesses so that we all may enjoy the fullness of life. 4, we affirm that our agreement is to pursue peace, walk in truth, uphold justice, tempered with mercy. 5, we affirm that we are like branches on a tree. Although we may grow in different directions, we share a common root, and as such, we pledge to respect each person's path, even as it may differ from one's own. We agree to walk in agreement that it is all right to disagree, and we protect and safeguard this right insomuch as the state of disagreement upholds an affirmation of life. We affirm that community building is the process of communal shared principles, shared resources, and is equitable access to resources. Therefore, we commit to being agents of an open culture that welcomes everyone to participate in the life of the community, with the provision that we also hold each other accountable for acts that do not support the life-affirming principles of our awareness, while equally looking for and enacting a commitment to forgive and restore in the spirit of humility and love. And number 7, we affirm the earth and all that dwell therein are manifestations held within the universal mind, Christ, and humanity's role is to be faithful stewards of this earth by demonstrating respect and dignity for all beings, the sacredness of Mother Earth, and our commitment to caring for her as we care for ourselves. Let us pray. God of surprises, you call us from the narrowness of our traditions to new ways of being church, from the captivities of our culture to creative witness for justice, from the smallness of our horizons to the bigness of your vision. Clear the way in us, your people, that we might call others to freedom and renewed faith. Clear the way in us, your people, that we might call others to wholeness and integrity. Great Spirit, you call us from fear to faithfulness, from clutter to clarity, from a desire to control to deeper trust, from the refusal to love to a readiness to risk. Clear the way in us, your people, that we might all know the beauty and power and danger of the gospel. Ashe.
Ashe, thank you. So I will share a little bit about Triumph Life Center. We opened on October 19th of last year under the umbrella of Triumph the Church of the New Age International, which was founded in 1904. We seek to further the work of founder Bishop Elias Dempsey Smith, who had a vision of a New World system that he fully believed was attainable through the shared practice of spiritual principles that would lead to our collective awakening or higher expression of the divine. Our vision is of an interdependent community formed from the tapestry of our individual and collective experiences of the divine, that fosters both an embodied spirituality and epistemology as pathways to establishing a new world where all may share in the fullness of life. Our mission is to promote the creation of new cultural practices and social and economic systems that are egalitarian, affirms our shared humanity, and holds sacred the earth and all life forms, to create a safe and sacred space where marginalized individuals and communities who may not have equal access to opportunities can connect up to expand both their spiritual and intellectual life and gain access to opportunities for personal growth through shared resources and support for developing spiritual gifts and intellectual pursuits, to honor the Sabbath as a time for individual and collective, spiritual, physical, emotional, and mental well being through shared music, spoken word, sacred readings, and when we're in person together, a communal meal. Our goal is to be a hub for conversations envisioning a new world order, creative arts expressions, emerging social entrepreneurships, promoting community-owned sustainable food systems for access to healthy living, expanding reverence and care for the earth and all life forms, forming alliances and building bridges across community barriers that mutually affirm our shared humanity, and people of all faiths, cultures, ethnicities, races, genders, orientations, abilities, personal challenges, etc., to be in community with each other on one accord. Thanks. So I'll pass it over to Wes for our sacred readings.
Okay, so that song is called Naquela Mesa, which means in that table. Is a song that the person is talking about their dad that passed away. So they talk about their stories, the stories that he used to tell in that table, everybody together. So that's the song that I'm gonna play, Naquela Mesa.
A beautiful lie. It looked pretty but destructive. A band-aid over a wound. This would never heal. If you believe that lie, you will be doomed. It will destroy you inside out. It's so beautiful, it made you feel comfortable. It's so pretty, it will change your reality. Once that lie proves to be a lie, I will have compassion for those who believe it. A beautiful lie turn a dream into a nightmare. To cover a hole in the wall with a picture. A fest of guilt. I wish I never did it. I'm dying inside. I can't believe I did this. What what I did what I did, I do. If they find out, what if they find out? Should I tell the truth? Oh no, I can't do that. I need a drink. How can I live with myself? I'm at my breaking point. There's no coming back from this. I think my life is over. I can't wait. I can't take this anymore. I know I was wrong. I cannot sleep. Ugly truth. It hurts, but it hurts, but you will grow from it. It hurts. It will make you stronger. It hurts, but you will blossom. It hurts, but you will learn from it. It hurts, but you have to embrace it. Welcome home. We've been watching for a long time to endure so much and still have a pure heart. We can't rewind time, but we can give you a fresh start. What you've been through become beautiful art. Welcome home. This is the place your scars become testimonies. Your rebirth will be a ceremony. Welcome home. This is where you belong. Welcome to Triumph Church.
Thank you both. That was awesome. I appreciate you. So we take another breath. So we'll get started with our discussion. Again, we have this overall theme of reimagining community. What kind of world do you want to live in, and what would it take to create that world? We have a guest with us, Aaron Carr from Housing Rights Initiative. Thank you so much for being here with us. I guess I want to just share, I was interested in this particular topic, which is why I reached out, because I wanted to learn a bit more about the housing crisis in New York, especially with pandemic happening, right? There's a lot of people that are facing housing insecurity, eviction, not being able to pay rent, unemployment, all of these things that have become such huge issues. So even just neighbors or friends of family that you hear stories about, it's disturbing and it's not fair also. So we wanted to hear what you have to say, what work you've done. You could start off by telling us a little bit about yourself too.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a presentation. Can I share my screen and then I can go
Yes,
over all of it?
you should be able to. I
Okay,
put it
awesome.
so that everyone participates.
Sorry, say that again. You broke up.
Um, you should be able to share the screen. Let me know if you're not able to.
Okay.
I adjusted the settings, so let's see. There it is.
All right, this works.
Nice.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. So I have until would you say 1 o'clock?
Yes,
Okay.
1:05. We're a little flexible.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to be respectful of your time, but thank you so much for having me. I guess yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about our organization, Housing Rights Initiative. So I'm Aaron Carr. I'm the founder and director of Housing Rights Initiative. This is an organization I created about 5 years ago, and it was an outgrowth of my experiences working in the South Bronx for a legislator, where I learned all about these housing issues that I really wanted to solve. And we're a nonprofit, and we investigate rent fraud, usually in rent stabilized buildings, and we connect tenants to legal support. So if a tenant is being illegally overcharged by their landlord in an affordable unit, we'll help get those tenants relief, their money back, and the adjusted rents. Rent stabilization, long story short, is the largest affordable housing program in New York City. About 1 million units, closer to 900,000, 950,000 units are rent stabilized, which impacts about 2.5 million tenants. So it is a massive source of affordable housing in the largest city in America. This is a rental history, and basically with rent stabilization, the rents can only go up incrementally every year. So every year, the Rent Guidelines Board, a city board, sets the allowable increases for rent stabilized apartments. And if you live in an apartment that used to be or still is rent stabilized, you can request the rental history for your apartment. So this is an example of what you can request, and it will tell you how much every tenant paid dating back to 1984. And this is a document that we look at these documents all day long, and this is how we figure out whether tenants are being overcharged or not. The problem with our system in many ways is it's an enforcement problem. A lot of times the State Housing Enforcement Agency, HCR, is not proactively and systematically looking into rent fraud. So our organization tries to fill this void. And laws, Abraham Lincoln once said, laws without enforcement are just good advice. So right now, there's very little enforcement, there's advice, but obviously a lot of companies are not following that. That's why we need a stronger enforcement system. There's rampant overcharges in rent stabilized buildings. There was actually an audit conducted by a state housing enforcement a branch of a state housing enforcement agency, the tenant protection unit, and they audited, I think it was about 1,300 landlords, and they found that there were in 40% of cases, they found overcharges. So when we say that this is a systematic issue, that's not hyperbole. There's a lot of overcharges in the rent stabilization program, and that's why we need a stronger enforcement system.
I have a question, actually.
Yeah, sure.
How do people find out that they're being overcharged, or do they just like kind of not know?
Yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, the rent stabilization program, it's so complicated that a lot of times tenants don't even know they're being overcharged. And the state housing enforcement agency doesn't send around these rental histories. And those are the histories that tell you how much every tenant paid in a given apartment since 1984. And that's how you can kind of figure out if there are overcharges. But DHCR doesn't send this around automatically. So the tenant first has to know that this document exists. And then even when they get this document, it's very hard to still understand. And you can do it with the proper education, which is why there's a lot of great organizations like Met Council on Housing, the Housing Justice Coalition, a lot of these organizations that educate tenants on how to discern if they're being overcharged or not. But it's very complicated. So a lot of times it goes undetected. And that's why there needs to be an educational component, teaching tenants how to enforce or how to figure out if they're being overcharged, and then an enforcement component where the state housing enforcement agency that we're paying hundreds of millions of dollars to every year in taxes, they should be properly enforcing rent stabilization system. So at the bottom of every rental history, this is actually a good segue. At the bottom of every rental history, DHCR, the Housing Enforcement Agency, literally admits that it's not enforcing the system. It says that DHCR does not attest to the truthfulness of the owner's statements or the legality of the rents reported in this document. So landlords are required to register their rents every year with the State Housing Enforcement Agency, but the state is not actually looking at that data. It is on the tenant to basically put on their lawyer hat, even if they're not lawyers, and figure this out themselves. So it really puts tenants at a disadvantage here. And there's a discrepancy here between what DHCR is admitting, that they're not looking at the rents and they're not enforcing the system, but then on their website they say that they exist to protect the rights of tenants facing rent overcharges. But how are you protecting the rights of tenants who are being overcharged if you're not looking at the data that's being registered by landlords with your agency? So there's a huge discrepancy.
Yes, call them out.
Yeah, call them out. That's right. And that's what we do. We do impact litigation. It's not, we're helping tenants directly, but we're also trying to use the litigation as an opportunity to shed light on these issues. It's called impact litigation. So basically, we live in an enforcement desert. We have a reactive enforcement model. The burden is placed on tenants to figure out if they're being overcharged, and there's limited investigations. And this is how the reactive enforcement model hurts tenants. This is an example portfolio that we made up. Let's say that there's 4,000 tenants living in this portfolio, and the average rent overcharge is $300, and for each unit, and the total illegal profits that the landlord is making is 14.4 million. And this is not a crazy example. We've seen way worse than this. So a few tenants, very few tenants, will figure out they're being overcharged, right? They either go to a nonprofit organization, or they went down a rabbit hole one night and were able to figure out the rent stabilization system. But very few are able to do this because it's a very complicated and time-consuming process. So those tenants will get their rental history from the State Housing Enforcement Agency. They'll file a complaint, right, with DHCR. They could also file a lawsuit, but oftentimes they file a complaint with the State Housing Enforcement Agency. And then the State Housing Enforcement Agency will come and investigate this like a decade later. It takes a long time. It's not really a decade, but it sometimes feels that way. I mean, I've seen cases go on for 5-6 years, which is crazy. You're being overcharged that entire time. So they'll look at the units, and maybe those tenants will get back some money in rent refunds. The problem, though, with this enforcement system of only investigating the units of tenants who complain is that it misses the big picture, right? And the big picture is that rent fraud is rooted in a systematic business model. It doesn't just affect 1, 2, or 3 tenants, but a lot of tenants, right, across entire portfolios. So by just confining these investigations to only the tenants who complain, it misses the big picture. And that's why landlords do it. And this is how landlords benefit, predatory landlords that are defrauding tenants. Here's a predatory landlord, and his business plan is to overcharge tenants. And why does he do it? Because there's a lot of money to be made, right? Little enforcement, a lot to gain. So in this example, he makes $14.4 million a year in rent overcharges. Now, a few tenants will figure out they're being overcharged and they'll file a complaint. And maybe the landlord, right, will lose, let's say, $400,000, right, to those tenants, but the landlord's still up, right, because he's still making $14 million a year. It's just the cost of doing business. And until there's an enforcement system that is proactively and systematically investigating these overcharges, right, it's going to make economic sense for predatory landlords to overcharge tenants. Right? It's part of a larger business model.
Aaron, just a quick question.
Sure.
On the enforcement desert. So I don't know if this is kind of an obvious answer or not, but what is the resistance from the local government and having an established law enforcement or proactive enforcement of rent? Is it, do the landlords have a lobbying arm where
Yeah.
they, okay.
Yeah, I think it's a mix of many things. I think one, it's just incompetence and laziness. It's work to look into rent fraud, and I think that there's that component. I think, to your point, there's a political component, right, where this is a big part of a lot of of predatory landlords' business models, and they are part of a lot of times part of either the RSA or REBNY. Those are the two main landlord lobbying firms. And they advocate, right, for weaker enforcement, even if they don't admit that. From my experience, they do. And then I think it's also just a lack of technology and imagination, right? I don't think the government, I don't think they have the proper tools in place. Like, landlords are using a 21st century model to defraud tenants, but the state housing enforcement agency is using a 20th century model to investigate those overcharges. So I think we need an overhaul of the system. And I think our organization, we just have 4 full-time staffers, and we've generated close to 70 class action lawsuits to date. So if we're able to do that with just a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the state housing enforcement agency's budget, what could they be doing? And that's we're on a suicide mission in a way. We want the government to put us out of business, right? We don't want our organization to have to exist. We want the government to do their job. So there's no reason to fill that void, and we can do something else in this world. I hope that answers your question.
I actually have another
Thank
question
you.
on top of
Yeah.
that. What inspired you to start this work? Did you have a particular experience that you were very disturbed by, or a friend or a colleague or something like that?
So in my previous position, I was the chief of staff for an assembly member in the South Bronx. And, we weren't like a United States Senate's office, but like we were a legislative office. So we thought that we would have some pull, right, to push the state housing enforcement agency and the local agencies to enforce predatory practices in our district. And when we would put in those complaints on behalf of our tenants, we found the government to be very unhelpful, very slow. We were basically, it was like waiting for Superman, and Superman never came. So we had to think of ways to get around the bureaucracy. And one way that we did that is by forming partnerships with private law firms and nonprofit law firms who take these cases on either on a pro bono basis or what's called a contingency basis. And what a contingency basis means that no one has to pay anything out of pocket, right? If the case is successful, the judge will award the lawyers with a percentage of the winnings, right? So that's not a perfect model because tenants deserve 100% of their money back, right? And that's why we want the government to do their job so they can get 100% back. But the contingency model is also a good one because any tenant can join a case and get relief and not have to pay anything out of pocket. So to answer your question, based on my experience working in government, it influenced me to think of ways of getting around what wasn't working and try to hit this from the outside as opposed to just the inside. Because I was working in government at the time. Now I'm on the outside pushing government to do their job.
Thank you.
Yeah. So one thing that we investigate is tax benefit fraud. Long story short, this is an example of one tax program. It's called J51. And this is a benefit that landlords receive in return for rehabilitating their buildings, making their buildings nicer, but also rent stabilizing them at the same time. And this is a program that costs our city $250 million a year. It is just one of many programs. And in 2011, there was a case called Roberts versus Tishman. This happened in Stuyvesant Town, where the courts ruled that if a landlord receives this benefit, all of the units have to be rent stabilized until the at least until the benefit expires, sometimes even longer. But a lot of landlords weren't doing this. They weren't properly rent stabilizing their buildings, even though they were receiving this benefit. So you would think, based on this court case, right, the government would then proactively enforce the tax benefit system and ensure that all of the landlords are in compliance. Unfortunately, what our investigation found is that that is not the case. This is a map of all of the buildings that we found under the J51 program that are out of compliance with rent stabilization. So nearly 8 years later, now this slide is old. It's probably like 9 or 10 years later. After that that decision, landlords are still not properly rent stabilizing their apartments. So we've investigated a lot of these buildings, which I'll talk about in a second, so we can get landlords to comply with these tax benefits and provide tenants with the affordable housing that they are entitled to by law. How to identify tax fraud? It's actually very easy. And this is what I mean by, like, it's pretty crazy that the government isn't doing this, because it's actually not difficult to do. All you have to do is just look at very basic data. If a landlord is this is a property tax statement, so that we pulled from a landlord. And as you can see on the property tax statement, the landlord is receiving a J51 tax benefit. As you know now, that if a landlord is receiving a tax benefit called J51, 100% of the units have to be rent stabilized. But as you can see on this property tax statement, only 43 units are rent stabilized. See where it says rent stabilization, number of apartments, 43. But the total number of units in this building is 70. So we know that this landlord is out of compliance because you just divide 43 by 70 and it doesn't give you 100%. It is that easy. So when the government pretends that they have to, this is more complicated than it seems, we get into fights with them all the time in the press where they're like, this is harder than it looks, or it's something that we have to look into, like all these different excuses. It's actually not very hard. I wish I can tell you that we're brilliant at HRI, but unfortunately, we're just looking at basic math here and figuring out if landlords are in compliance or not. So very easy to identify, a very easy problem to fix. In theory, we just got to get the government to do their job. So rent stabilized units can no longer be deregulated anymore. But from 1994 to 2012, we lost about 163,000. Not all of that is due to fraud, but I suspect that a lot of it is due to fraud. I think a lot of landlords were removing their apartments out of rent stabilization by circumventing our rent stabilization laws. Luckily, under the new rent stabilization laws, which were reformed a few years ago, now landlords can't remove their apartments from rent stabilization, so that helps. But there's still a lot of units that were taken out of rent stabilization illegally under the old system. So we're still trying to clean up that mess. And we use a litigation strategy.
So again, a quick question here.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Aaron. So the New York tax statement that you showed, which showed the previous two slides, how many apartments were in the building. And then I think there were 70 and only 43 was rent stabilized. So if there is a building, is it possible for, in that one building, for some of the apartments to be de-rent stabilized and others remain rent stabilized?
That's a great question. And if the building wasn't receiving a tax benefit, the answer to that would be yes. So those are more difficult cases. If they're not receiving a tax benefit, then I have to answer your question by looking into like each apartment and figuring out by itself. What makes this easy is because it's receiving that tax benefit, 100% of the units have to be rent stabilized. So it's a binary equation. Either the building is in compliance and 100% of the units are rent stabilized, or it's not in compliance and less than 100% are rent stabilized, so just by virtue of that tax benefit.
So that tax credit just automatically equates to all the units should be rent stabilized.
That's right.
So
the J51.
So if they're not receiving that, then there is a possibility that there is some proportion of rent stabilized and non-rent stabilized.
That is correct. And those are, we've done about 4 or 5 of those cases. Usually, I won't get into this, but usually it gets, just because it will take a while to explain, but like in buildings that aren't receiving tax benefits, then the question is, did they do the apartment improvements that would be required for them to justify removing an apartment from rent stabilization? So like back in the day, there was a threshold at which landlords would have to cross in order to remove an apartment from rent stabilization. So you may get a unit that's taken out of rent stabilization because the landlord did $60,000 of apartment improvements. So that would be a harder case to figure out, even though it's possible. We have 4 class actions involving this, where we'd have to figure out, did the landlord do the improvements that they were required to do to remove the apartment from rent stabilization? So to answer your question, when a landlord isn't receiving a tax benefit, it's a more complicated equation that requires further investigation. So if a tenant is being defrauded, they're entitled to a rent refund, a rent reduction, and a properly rent stabilized lease. That's what we fight for. We use the class action mechanism, and I love the class action. So there are stupid class actions and there are good class actions. So stupid class action, you may get like some of these in the mail where it's like you bought a painting 5 years ago and you were overcharged on the painting, and now you can buy another painting for half off. And it's like, well, one, that's not like, why would I want to buy a painting from a company that just screwed me over 5 years ago? And bad. In the real estate world, these are good class actions because there's so much to be won and the universe is small, right? So if you have the painting example, you may get millions of tenants that are sharing a pot of money, right? That they were overcharged. But in real estate, you may get a building of like 50 units where tenants were defrauded on average $50,000 a year, and they can get back tens of thousands of dollars. So there are stupid class actions and good class actions. In the context of rent stabilization, I think the class action model is excellent. Not as good as the government doing their job, right? I give the class action model a B. I give the government doing their job an A, right? But unfortunately, the government doing their job is not happening right now. So we have to resort to the imperfect, but still, I think, strong model. And the reason why I say it's scalable is, here's an example lawsuit. One of our class actions is against the 5th largest, I think it's 3rd or 4th largest residential landlord in the entire city. There are over 20,000 tenants that live in this landlord's portfolio, and we have 69 plaintiffs. Because we filed it as a class action, right? These 69 plaintiffs represent any tenant that is being defrauded in that portfolio, which could be up to 20,000 tenants. So if we get class certification, it won't be just those 69 plaintiffs that benefit. It will be any tenant out of the 20,000 tenant universe that is being overcharged. So you're talking about millions. If we're successful, and we've already survived the motion to dismiss, if we win this case, you're talking about millions upon millions upon millions, maybe tens of millions of dollars back for tenants in this portfolio. So if we didn't file it as a class action, only 69 of these plaintiffs would benefit, right? But because we filed it as a class action, these 69 plaintiffs represent any tenant that's being overcharged in this entire portfolio, which serves 2 purposes, by the way. 1, we're helping the tenants, and 2, we're creating a deterrent effect, right? The more tenants you help, the less incentive, the less of an incentive a landlord will have to continue these practices, right? They only defraud tenants because it makes sense economically. If they started getting slammed, every landlord in New York City started getting slammed for these practices across the board, right? Then it would be a different equation. We have generated close to 70 class action lawsuits to date. We've been featured in we're very press heavy because we like to bring attention to these issues, and we push the governor, the government, the city government, Mayor de Blasio, Governor Cuomo, HPD, DHCR, all these agencies. We push them to do their job through the press. So when we file a lawsuit, we generate a lot of press around it, and then we use that press to call them out, to shame them, in the hopes that they'll do their jobs going forward.
Aaron, there's a question from James. James, I don't know if you want to go ahead and ask, or if you want us to just read from the chat.
Does it apply to people who have moved out? It's a great question. Who were overcharged while they were there? Yes, as long as they moved out fairly recently. I believe it would be 6 years now. So if you moved out up to 6 years ago, you should be good. But after that time, you'll have a statute of limitations problem. But we have cases where the only class representative just moved out. And we were also featured in a Netflix documentary. We have an ongoing investigation against Kushner companies. We've generated 5 lawsuits against Kushner, and you can watch us on Netflix. I think it's season 2, episode 3 of this the show called Dirty Money, where you can see us. You can see our investigations on Netflix. So the first problem I mentioned, there's 2 problems here. The first one is we have a real estate problem where landlords are not following rent stabilization laws and are defrauding tenants, and we need to overhaul our enforcement system. The other issue we have is we do have a housing shortage. New York City creates less housing than any other large city in the United States of America. And that might seem crazy because we always see construction like around us, like all the time. But unfortunately, the data shows that we do not create enough housing of all types, including social housing and other types of housing. So that's something we have to deal with. Mayor de Blasio's affordable housing plan, we've been fairly critical of it. This is each blue dot is a new housing building that was created, or a affordable housing that was created through Mayor de Blasio's affordable housing plan. The problem with his housing plan is he only upzoned or increased density in low income areas and didn't distribute the burden to higher income areas. And it might sound counterintuitive, but you can actually create deeper affordable housing at a lower cost in high income areas through Mayor de Blasio's affordable housing plan. If I had more time, I would explain why that is, but I'd be happy to send over a few links if that's helpful, showing you why that is. So the reason why de Blasio did not upzone higher income or create a lot of affordable housing in high income areas is because wealthy homeowners tend not to want that. And Mayor Bloomberg was the same way. And basically every mayor in modern history of New York City, they've always been very resistant to create affordable housing in high income areas. And here's an example of
Well,
this.
that's where segregation comes in and everything,
Yes,
socioeconomic status and racism.
absolutely. So that is exactly right. And it's a mix of, and you can't, I think the 2 are connected. It's a mix of racism and then also concern about property values, which could be racist too, right? If I'm a white wealthy homeowner and I'm afraid that if you allow, some, lower income people and people of color to move into my neighborhood, well, that's going to affect my property value. So I can't allow that, right? They won't admit that. They won't say the quiet part out loud like they used to. As sometimes they do, by the way, but it's less often now. But you can basically, there's a lot of studies on this, which I'd be happy to show, and that is the case. That white wealthy homeowners are afraid of diversity for that reason, and that is why Mayor de Blasio and Mayor Bloomberg did not create a lot of affordable housing in wealthy areas. In Soho, for example, Mayor de Blasio created a grand total of 0 units of affordable housing. And Soho is the 4th richest area in the United States of America. Why shouldn't Soho do their fair share? And don't get me wrong, some people will say, well, we need to preserve the history and there's historic buildings and all this. Okay, fine. There's some historic buildings that we should preserve, but if you're just saying that we can't create any new housing in an entire neighborhood because it's going to infringe upon the history of the buildings, well, what about the history of segregation? What about the history of racism? What about the history of discrimination? Don't get me wrong. Yes, we have to preserve some historic buildings, but we should not preserve segregation. So we need to create more of a balance. And that's why we are fighting right now to create affordable housing in Soho. I've made a ton of enemies doing this, but I'm proud of those enemies because this is not Long Island. Even though we should create more affordable housing in Long Island, this is not a gated community. This is New York City, one of the most diverse places on planet Earth. We talk a big progressive game, and I think we need to show it through action. And I think we need to create more affordable housing in every area of New York City. So yeah, we're doing a big push here. So long story short, I'll conclude here. I think we need a 2-front war here. I think we need a war against predatory landlords who are defrauding tenants and who are not following the law. And by war, I mean through litigation, through class actions, through enforcement. And then we also need to push higher income communities to do their fair share, because it's unfair that the development burden always falls on the lowest income communities. And the reason why it always falls on the lowest income communities is because if you're not building in higher income communities, that's what happens. And I think we need a comprehensive plan. I think we need more housing. We need more social housing. We need to get funding for our public housing. We need stronger rent stabilization laws. We need rental assistance. We need to hit it at every corner. And that's what they do, by the way, in countries like Germany and France, which have their problems too. They have way more affordable housing than the United States of America because they create a lot of housing at all levels. So thank you for having me. Here's some of my information. I'm happy to answer questions, obviously, but our email address, you could follow me on Twitter at Aaron A. Carr, and you can follow us on Housing Rights Initiative at Housing Rights NY.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Aaron. That was great.
Thank you.
Your slides were awesome too. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
I feel like I just learned so much. My head is kind of gonna explode.
It's a lot of information, and please hold me accountable. I'm happy to send you some. I wasn't able. I would need about 3 weeks of your time to explain everything, but I have links, right? That links and publications on segregation, on our inequitable zoning system, on international models and how other countries do it. I can send a lot of different information over that would further your understanding.
Yeah, this is James. I would definitely love to get that other information. I mean, this is it reminds me of a conversation I had with Sandra where she was talking about how people are abused by the system, and it's systematic, and it has nothing to, and it's never called out specifically, right? What you were saying, and it's really it's very insidious, and I'm this is kind of an emotional kind of response, but it's just it's beyond me that people who really have no need of any more money, right? I mean, do this. I mean, if you've made $14 million in 1 year, you really don't need $14 million the next year. 7 million would be just fine.
That's right.
Your lifestyle would not change.
That's right.
So I don't get it. And it makes me, the other thing it makes me realize is that there really has to be practical, on the ground kind of responses to these things. It's not about having, writing another book or having a class where people sit down and say, hey, here's the problem. The problems are evident, right? And what's needed is more people getting funding to actually do the work instead of more people just writing more papers. So that's kind of my comment on that.
Amen. Yeah, that's great. I agree.
Yeah, I want to just piggyback off of James. One, how is your agency funded? And two, what can groups like ours and other community folks do to support this effort?
Yeah, so our group, we are funded through the Robin Hood Foundation. We're funded through the Oak Foundation, and then we're funded by individual contributors that usually see us in the press. And we do not make anything from the litigation itself. That's a misnomer. Sometimes people think that we're filing these suits and we're making money. That would be illegal. We make nothing from the suits themselves. And two, we don't take donations from the law firms that we partner with. So this way we're able to hold them accountable. And to answer your question about getting involved, we're not membership based, but there are organizations that are fighting the good fight in Albany right now, like the Housing Justice for All Coalition. That's basically a coalition of, I think it's like 100 or 200 potentially organizations that are fighting for stronger rent stabilization laws, fighting for relief for tenants, to provide housing for the homeless, et cetera, et cetera. And you'd be coming in at a very good time because, as you know, we're in the midst of a pandemic. The economy is not doing well, and our housing system is just doing worse than ever before. So I think I'm sure they would love to have all of you involved.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
We got any other comments or questions?
This is James. This was really, really good. At first, I was like, okay, here we're going to be talking about rent stabilization, but it's like, no. And I just think about my friend in college who had a rent stabilized apartment, then he moved out and blah blah blah, had all these problems. I was like, okay, what's what is this going to be, But it's really, and here's the other thing that it really makes evident is that there are people that are actually doing real things and solving real problems. And when in my little world, I don't see people doing that, so it's harder for me to imagine it happening, but it's good to see this, that there are people doing good things. And even though, I have my own ideas of what people should be doing and shouldn't be doing, and it's great, and I'm working on that. But it's really given me, hearing you has really reminded me that there are people doing real work, making real impact in a system that's really, really messed up. When you say, when I look at that, that chart on how, and if that was in a database, it'd be easy. It's like, one small little script could identify all of those,
Right.
those out of compliance, buildings in one sweep. And a friend of mine just got a job doing he got a job being a business analyst. And I'm like, here they are spending, they're going to be spending $300 to $400,000 so that they can take one piece of paper and not move it anymore and automate it, right? And here, so they're going to spend $300,000 on one piece of paper, whereas you could take that money and move, right, $14 million. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. But I'm very glad that you shared, and it was very motivating for me.
Thank you so much. Yeah, really happy you had me.
I guess I have a final question.
Sure.
Where does gentrification play a role in all of these topics that we've discussed? Like, I have an understanding of what it means, right? But how does it influence? How does it affect? Either back or forth. Does that question?
Yeah, no, it does. So yeah, and I think it speaks to the 2 points I made. So one, real estate fraud, right? That if landlords are defrauding tenants or pushing tenants out of rent stabilized apartments illegally, right, and replacing them with higher income tenants, that is one form of gentrification, right? The other form is the supply constraint. And when I say supply, I mean of all types of housing. So in Vienna, which has a lot of social housing, they have private housing, social housing, and public housing. So New York City creates less housing than almost any large city, and actually less housing than any large city in the United States of America. So what happens is that you have affluent tenants that are competing for a small percentage of apartments, and in a battle between higher income tenants and lower income tenants, the lower income tenants are oftentimes going to lose, right? That when they're competing for the same share of or a small universe of available housing. So we need to create a lot more housing. We need to create a lot of affordable housing. Just creating private housing is not going to be enough for the lowest income tenants. We also need to make sure that the housing is affordable for the lowest income tenants so they can continue to live in their community. So you have to hit it from both sides, right? You have to prevent real estate fraud. We also need to create more housing for tenants, particularly lower income tenants.
I have a quick question. You explained, can you explain the difference between, you said public housing, social housing, and private housing?
Yeah, thanks, James, because I was going to ask the same thing. So thank you.
So market rate housing, right, could just mean either non-rent stabilized housing, right? It's just market rate. It's not rent regulated. It could also mean rent regulated housing, right? So our rent stabilization stock, a lot of that, almost all of it, is owned by private landlords. So that would be private housing that is rent regulated. So a good example of this would be Switzerland. Switzerland, right, has national rent control. So they create a lot of private housing every year. but almost all of that private housing is rent regulated. Public housing is where the buildings are owned and the land is owned by the government. So that would be like NYCHA, right? Social housing has a broader definition. It depends on sometimes who you ask, but social housing can be, a nonprofit organization, for example, that owns a building and it, receiving federal or receiving funding from the city or state to rent regulate it. So not social housing is not public housing, but it should have a permanent affordable housing component. So maybe a nonprofit landlord that is receiving funding from the government to provide permanent, long-term housing, affordable housing for tenants.
Thank you.
Aaron.
I guess also, how do you, in the beginning, you had said to be able to look at the documents to see or the rental history. How do you find that, or who do you request it from?
Yeah, you could request that from the Housing Enforcement Agency, HCR. That's the State Housing Enforcement Agency. There's a website I can send around. If you just follow up with me by email for all the stuff I promised, I can send that to you. There's third-party platforms that allow you to request it on the internet, or you can reach out to HCR directly and ask for the rental history either over the phone or by email.
So you just type in the address.
Was rent stabilized, or it still is rent stabilized. That rental history will be available.
Okay, so if you do it online, you could just type in your building's address and see what comes up.
They mail it to you, so they won't. There's no database. This is it's an unfortunate part of our system. That should be the case where you can just look at it online, but unfortunately you can't. You can request it, and it would come in the mail in 3 to 5 business days.
Okay, so you got the paper document too.
Yep.
Thank you, Aaron.
My pleasure.
Okay, so we'll start gearing towards.
If you could stop share on your screen, so we could go back to ours.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to segue into our closing segment. Again, we just thank Aaron Carr of Housing Rights Initiative in New York City for just such rich information. I know I got a lot of information that I didn't have coming into this, so we appreciate it. Brenda, back in your hands.
I will lead us through a short closing meditation, so you have some moments to just relax, absorb the information that we were just given, and do with it as you will. So we can start with some deep breaths. And as you take that first breath, notice how your body might have just let out some tension. As you take that second breath, notice how the air feels moving in and out of your body. As you take that third breath, notice any thoughts, sensations, emotions that come up for you, and just acknowledge them and let them be. I'll lead us through another body scan that asks for a call to action. And let's start in our feet this time. Feel your feet, wiggle your toes. If your legs are crossed or if they're on the floor, ask yourself, how can I use my feet to better myself and the world around me? How can I use my legs, the strength and the mobility that I have, as much as I have? How can I use my legs to better myself and the people around me? And you can move up to your hips, your stomach. How can I use these parts of my body to better myself and the people around me? Maybe it's the choices I make with my diet, where I choose to buy my food, the types of furniture that I purchase. And you can move up to your chest, to your heart. How can I use my heart with all the love and beauty and divinity that I have within me to better myself and the world around me? My shoulders, my arms, my hands. What can I make? What can I create? What can I write to better myself and the world around me? And as we go back up, my neck, my throat, my vocal cords, my voice, my tongue, my jaw. How can I use these parts of myself to better myself and the world around me? My nose, my ears to listen, my eyes to see. How can I use these parts of my body to better myself and the world around me? My mind, my attitude, my thoughts, my knowledge and wisdom, my experience. How can I use these to better myself and the world around me? My body as a whole, my soul. Why is my soul here? And how can I use it? How can I be with it? How can I be to better myself and the world around me? And you can take some final breaths. I'll strike the bowl twice and we will close. I like to let out a sigh. And a little wiggle. Thank you. You can keep those questions in mind always as you go throughout your day. Ground yourself every so often.
Thank you, Brenda.
Sure.
Invitation to join Triumph. Hear how you can become a part of our Triumph family. You can become a member of Triumph and start a Triumph Charters group in your community. Email us and request more information. We are forming groups virtually throughout the country, and you become a spiritual leader and a healer in this movement. If you were once a part of Triumph, you're still family, and we would love to welcome you back home. Email us and let us know you would like to reconnect with your Triumph family, and we will show you how. Your church or faith community can also become a part of our Triumph family as a friend of Triumph and share the life of this community. Email us for more information at triumphlifecenter@gmail.com. You can also support our ongoing mission of healing, educating, inspiring, and creating new way of being in the community through your financial donation, which are tax deductible. Cash App, $Triumph 2020, or mail to Triumph, the Church of the New Age, P.O. Box 2157, Newark, New Jersey 07114.
Thank you, Trav.
As usual, our announcements, we have our resource guide, which we share on our Facebook page. It's an interactive Google document, and you're welcome to go through the resources we have there. However, if you don't find what you need, or if you have any other questions, comments, suggestions, you can email us at triumphlifecenter@gmail.com. You can also check us out on social media. We have a Spotify playlist with all the music that we've shared throughout the months we've been together online. We also have a YouTube page where all of our recordings from our virtual gatherings and even some from when we were in person earlier this year, last year. So take a look. We also have an Instagram, Triumph Life Center. Simply that. If you happen to use Instagram.
Yeah,
As always, continue to use your masks. Be safe when you go out. The numbers are rising again, and
yes.
nothing has changed. If anything, it's just getting worse. So please be very careful. The decisions you make really matter.
Absolutely. We want also, Brenda, folks to subscribe to our YouTube page, Triumph Life Center.
Yes.
So, if you watch one of the videos, just, subscribe so that you are a part of our subscription. We want to enhance that, and like our social media page on Facebook also. Brenda, we have Kim is coming back. You want to just share when that is? That's something that we're looking
Yes,
forward
that's actually gonna be a month from now. We have the haiku queen coming back, Kim B. Miller. She's awesome. That will be December 27th, I believe. The
Yes,
end of
please.
December.
So we'll end out the year with her. So we're really looking forward to that. And next week we're going to pick up our theme. We're going to go through our quotes and questions that we had previously scheduled for this week, and we'll pick them up for next week. So we invite everyone to just come back and join back in the conversation.
Who's reading, shall I?
Yes, go ahead, Brenda.
A word to live by. Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. If you realize that you have enough, you are truly rich.
Amen. Amen.
Thank
Let
you.
us pray. We cannot merely pray to you, O God, to end war, for we know that you have made the world in a way that people must find their own path to peace within themselves and with their neighbors. We cannot merely pray to you, O God, to end starvation, but you have already given us the resources with which to feed the entire world if we would only use them rightly. We cannot merely pray to you, O God, to end despair, for you have already given us the power to clear away slums and to give hope, if we would only use our power justly. We cannot merely pray to you, O God, to end disease, for you have already given us great minds with which to search out cures and healing, if we would only use them constructively. Therefore, we pray to you instead, O God, for strength, determination, and willpower, to do instead of just pray, to become instead of merely to wish. Ashe. And Wes is going to close us out with our closing music, closing song. Go ahead, Wes. reach out, touch somebody's hand, make this world a better place. We can. We know we can. Have a great week, everyone. Be safe, be well. We love you. See you next week. Take care. Wow, Brenda. Brenda, that was a good